Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green and you're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. So I realize many of you have been sitting on pins and needles asking me what are my thoughts about this crisis and this war that is currently raging on in the Middle East, specifically regarding Gaza and the Gaza bombardment by Israel, attack, counterattack by both sides, Hamas. What's happening? What are my thoughts? And in recent days, there's been numerous reports coming out, not just from the mainstream media, of course, defending Israel, as is the case with the U.S. and Israel being its primary ally, but also with the alternative media trying to describe and understand what the real reason is behind this conflict. And I think that both parties are pointing out viable and valid options, but really failing to nail it on the head. I mean, what is Gaza really about? I saw a report yesterday linking Gaza specifically to natural gas. That's the sole reason for the engagement and the sole reason for the bombardment and the death of innocent civilians, which is making up men, women, and children. And these are just ungodly, terrifyingly evil acts. Now, it's not to say that natural gas or energy or something like that isn't playing a role in this war. You know, again, wars are fought over things like energy, land, power, money. And I think that's really the root of what's happening today, is that what's happening in Gaza isn't really just specifically about one thing. I think that what's happening in this part of the world is an engineered flashpoint by the West. The United States of America, of course, directly linked to Israel. As the mainstream media continues to defend Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu and propagandize to us that the reason for the conflict was because a couple Israeli teens died and vice versa, Palestinian have been dying and that's the reason for the war. Now, first and foremost, we know that's totally and utterly propaganda. We know that Israel had a gag order on the deaths of the Israeli teens, and they perfectly timed and coordinated this to justify their bombardment of Gaza and the bombing of innocent civilians. And now, I just checked out the main wires today, earlier this morning, and Israel just notified Gaza and the people of Gaza up to 100,000 people to evacuate. So all of this is escalating further. But this is bigger than Gaza. Gaza is a flashpoint for a much greater, bigger global conflict. And I think it's being utilized right now by the West, by the United States government, Barack Hussein Obama, the bankers and power structure here in the States, and also Benjamin Netanyahu as a flashpoint for greater war and a greater conflict. All of this will be used, in my opinion, in the not too distant future to justify invading and the invasion of other countries in the Middle East, like Iraq, and the ongoing manufactured war by the West and the propagandizing of militant groups like ISIS. Notice how we just trade Durka Al-Qaeda terrorists for another group. It goes from Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and now it's ISIS. They're the new evil frontier that the West needs to conquer. Whether or not this is the Bush administration or it's the Obama administration, they're always playing into this propaganda. And Gaza, as it boils over and the unrest gets even more violent, and the sides are warring against each other, and the protests get even more aggressive in the streets. It's almost like illegal immigration here in the United States, another manufactured event so the Republicans can play on it in the 2016 election for their platform. All of this being used to build up to greater conflict and to build up to war. I believe today, the history books will show, 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years or more from now, if we still exist and don't destroy ourselves first, that we are already engaged in World War III. We are already engaged in the global war. Our worst fears, the population's worst fears, the working man and woman's worst fears, America's worst fears, the world's worst fears. And that is why Gaza is being used and engineered as a flashpoint in the Middle East for a much brighter, bolder conflict. All of this about money, specifically. It's not that natural gas and some of these issues don't play a role, but this is about the dollar. This is about global finance, global economics. Note and notate that the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, are now forming their own banks, their own World Bank, their own equivalent of the IMF. They are brokering their own deals, doing trade in their own currency, moving away from the long dominance of the United States and our currency here, the US dollar. They are moving into a new future and a new frontier where they're in control of the monetary system. All this about money, all this about power. We could say there's ancillary arguments like natural gas, but this is all about a much greater conflict of world superpowers battling it out and playing the game of chess for total domination and global control. And that's exactly what I think is happening in Gaza today. And I think we're losing sight as critical thinking individuals. And I think the mainstream media and the alternative media is losing sight if they're solely focused on who's in the right and who's in the wrong, either defending or attacking Israel or defending or attacking Palestine. I think both of those arguments are wrong. You're falling into the right-left paradigm, Republican, Democrat, it's the equivalent, and you're not seeing the bigger picture. You know, I wholeheartedly believe, as someone that cares about humanity and loves people, all people, that any of the crimes being committed right now, in the name of anything that are killing men, women, and children, should be prosecuted as humanitarian war crimes. Whether or not this is coming from Israel and the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, or this is coming from Palestine, Hamas, or any of these other groups. Both parties should be ashamed of themselves. Both parties should be charged with war crimes. And that's the bigger picture, folks. The bigger picture is this is about global conflict. This is about global war. This is about show me the money. And it's exactly why Gaza is a flashpoint for our very worst fear. Gaza is the flashpoint for the larger war in the Middle East. We've seen this in Syria. We've seen this in Libya with the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi, the attack on Bashar al-Assad. In Syria, we see this in Iraq as the mainstream media is breaking news on a daily basis that they're building a caliphate and putting into order Sharia law in this part of the world. Again, the government has their eyes on the entire region, not just Gaza. And that's why the mainstream media is spinning this. And they're going to escalate this, and it's going to be used as a catalyst to justify war. I personally don't know what's going to happen next, what the next bomb to go off will be. All I know is this is how it's being pitched by the mainstream media and the paradigm that makes up the New World Order and the power structure today. And it's much bigger than natural gas lines. Again, pointing a finger at either group, defending and or attacking either group, Israel, Palestine, Hamas, or the evildoers in Israel, to use some George W. Bush language, is ignoring the greater picture, is ignoring what's really happening in the Middle East. What's taking place right now, folks, is your worst fear. This is world war. Hard-hitting and in your face. I'm Christopher Green. Get it out everywhere, make it viral, and click that link below to share it everywhere.